This is the live podcast, guys. Thank you both for coming, and please make it as natural as possible and as interesting as possible. And the truth is, I've got two amazing women who have come from different backgrounds. Yeah, Auntie Uju here. She's a director in a global charity. And Tosi is a founder of a smaller charity. And as much as there are differences, I'm sure there are ways, there are similarities as well. One similarity is that the focus is around children. And I think the first question is from passion to impact. So for you, how did you get in? Because, when you go to a LinkedIn page, you see, and I'm like, you actually have been in this space for a long time. That's on half my age, really. So you've actually been there for that long. So for you, was it a thing of, passion or purpose, or did you just apply to a job and then you found yourself there, or you intentionally wanted to be in that space?
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And it's truly a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I know that this is going to be recorded, so I'll be a bit more cagey. But yeah, thanks, Tosi. It's funny when you talked about this being your purpose and not knowing what, if you had a choice, you'd be doing the same thing again. That really, it struck me that why did I never think about what I do as my purpose? When people ask me, how did you get here? I'm like, I don't know. I was born into this space in the sense that my grandmother, she's been dead for over 30 years now. When I was growing up, she was called Mama Red Cross. Oh, wow. So she worked for the British Red Cross, and which eventually became the Nigerian Red Cross. But prior to that, growing up, in the African settings, in the rural African settings, for most people who don't know, you would usually, the people who are a bit more well-to-do, not necessarily wealthy, but doing better than siblings, would often take support them in raising their children. And so going home, every time we went to see my grandmom, there were children all around her, not half grandchildren, but children of other people who couldn't afford to raise their children. And therefore, it was natural that she would presumably work for the Red Cross for some reason. Before she passed, over 30 years ago, she had built a motherless babies home because those children she was taking in got so much that she had to build a home and actually recruit people to help her look after the children. And so she built a motherless babies home. So that was what I was born into. It was already there, it was already existing. Fast track to a few years, I went to pharmacy school. That was my first degree. And I started working in now, when I say this, you know my age. It was called, it was an organization which you now know as GSK, but it was called Smith Klein Beecham back in the day, and and then Glasgow Smith Klein before the name change. But anyway, when I was working there as a pharmacist, one of the things that brought me joy was being able to go into the community in the guise of community empowerment. It was actually marketing for our pharmaceutical products, but we would go into support communities, deworming activities, and those were the days before the malaria vaccine was formulated. So there was a lot of malaria, and we were very big on malaria medicine. Malaria is very endemic in tropical African countries. Anyway, I found so much joy being able to interact with communities, and some of the side events we would do would be to host things to get children to know our brand of products as a household name. So it was brand marketing, it was brand awareness, but it brought me joy. And so soon after that, I became a Christian in the full sense that I made a commitment to really understand the person of Christ. And that further drove my drive in the sense that through the church, we had some community empowerment activities, feeding programs, hospitals, quite a few things that were very much up my alley. And I got so much joy from doing that. And so I quit my job at the GSK and I went to work for the church full time just so that I would get an opportunity to do the things that brought me joy. Fast forward a few years later, I was back working in the corporate sector, but this time I was working in external affairs of a bank. And guess what? I was in charge of CSR initiatives. Now, that gave me more joy. And so after a while, I thought, you know what? I think I better just take a mid-career break, do a master's. And at the time, HIV was quite predominant in the Nigerian setting, particularly for young people. And there were lots of young children. There were lots of young people, but even more orphans and vulnerable children whose parents had fallen victim to the AIDS epidemic at the time. And so that really struck a chord with me as I continued my work in the CSR space. So I wanted to come and build on my pharmacy degree, get a master's in public health, and go back to Nigeria and set up an orphanage in memory of my grandmom, but an orphanage strictly for HIV orphans, you know. But the good thing is, so I came and I did a master's, an MBA in public policy because I wanted to understand policy. I realized that policy drives response. I wanted to understand how we could influence on the policy level, but then I also wanted the practical experience of actually I wanted the theoretical background from a public health degree. So after my MBA, I did a public health master's. I wanted to really go back equipped, you know, but also I guess it could also be a default because my parents are professors and I grew up and before you do anything, you would have the academic backing I was going into a space that I hadn't been in before. I wanted to really get ready. So while I was doing my master's in public health, I came across an ad for someone to go to Nigeria and do a 3-month research study around sexual and reproductive health and maternal health. It was meant to be a digital health program. I thought this is fantastic. I was looking for incentive for my thesis. And to be fair, that really launched my foray in the international development sector. The output of that research study was that we were able to write for funding for a pilot program, which ran for 2 years in Nigeria and eventually became a 5-year program. And I was privileged to be recruited to run that digital health program and take it to 8 countries in Africa and 2 in Southeast Asia. So I had a good 13-year journey with One World, a social media organization, and I was privileged to lead the foray into using social media to address social impact for that organization. So it was a really interesting journey, and and that's what started it formally. So it was great that you had the background. I tied that background to your talk because it was all about purpose. I knew that I wanted to do something, and I had been born into this, but it never quite clicked. And so many times when I wanted to leave the sector, I suppose a few times I wanted to leave the sector, I felt that what else would you do that will tie your passion to your profession? Yeah. And I haven't found that yet. I'm still looking.
I think you're a well-rounded person in that space, because I hear fundraising, I hear social media, I hear you have hands-on experience as well, even on the field. And these are most of the things people struggle with. You know, people in the charity space. For someone like me, I'm not great with social media, and people then need to look for, maybe outsource, to be able to make the kind of noise they need to make. And I'll use myself as an example. When I started, I used to say, I don't want anything louder than the children. So I never wanted to put myself out there. It had to be all about the children. But it took me years to understand that for you to get the kind of help that you need, you then need to put yourself out there. You need to be out there. You can't do it from the back. Because the more you speak, the more people know. And one of the reasons I'm doing this today is I've said, Tolu, you have to do it afraid. Because whether you do it or not, there's still an element of fear. So why not just do it and do it afraid? So Tosin, tell us, how did you get here? Is it purpose for you or did you stumble on it?
I think it's purpose. I think I'm still on the journey, to be honest. My very, very first experience was actually at SOS Children's Village Solo. And I started in music, so like the song I said. So I started in music where my dad had a gospel band and they were performing a fundraiser, a Christmas show. And I went just to keep him company kind of thing. And then I was surprised just seeing orphans, basically. Then we have motherless babies home, we call it there. I was like, where are these children? Where are their parents? And I was asking questions. And for me, I wanted to make them happy. So this was when I was about 2-3 years old. And then I came back next year, did a fundraiser. And somehow, I think, to be honest, I stumbled into music. What I really wanted to do was that cause-led, that charity element of how do you make impact with children? How do you, I think as I got to being a teenager, I think the question I had was whenever I saw, unfortunately, when you hear stories of widows in Nigeria, for example, where they lose their property, they kick them out of houses, I always kind of thought about people who were desolate, people who had nowhere to go, the voices were not heard, children who were not allowed to speak, people who were poor and had just nowhere to go, literally. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, what can I do? What's the best way to intervene in that situation? Do you go and give widows money? Do you go and sponsor children? Like, how do you do this? Do you house people? Just all the sort of thoughts. And I think what resonated with me most was the best way to kind of intervene, was at the very start with primary school children. And then it was a question of, what do I do? And at that point, it was, because I was, to be honest, I never thought I would run anything. I always thought, business, doing something, not for me. Yes, music, okay, it just happened. I mean, I signed a contract that God knows what happened with that contract. But it was a sense of, I just never thought I was a business person. And in charity, I just thought I would never run anything. But in this situation, I just felt I had to do this. There was something that was calling me that was just so heavy. And so I would go around to all my uncles who were in Nigeria. So I left the UK, quit my job here, went to Nigeria to just do this thing that I didn't even know what I was going to be doing. But then I surrounded myself with a lot of my uncles who worked at banks, who worked in financial institutions, oil companies. I'm like, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm thinking. And I remember one of my uncles sat me down and he was like, okay, let's plot this. Okay, how do you think you want to do this? And I was like, definitely education. Okay, what's the way to do it? Do you want to provide shoes? Do you want to provide food? Do you want to provide books? Like, just thinking about it in that way. And then back into what I sat with myself, really, because I really realized that a lot of the conversations, just like you said, that whole thing of, how am I going to do this? I'm afraid to do this. Again, the part of me was, am I qualified? I did not have a degree in education or any kind of, so it was all those questions I had, but for me, it was like, I really liked the idea of when I was in school, I had libraries and I had colorful storybooks. How can I support children in primary school with colorful storybooks? Because I started looking at the statistics, so then I started asking questions. A lot of children in school at that time, I think it was about 50% of children in primary school make it to secondary school, and another 50% make it to university. So you probably have about a quarter of children from primary school making it to university. So I was like, okay, basically that means a whole bunch of children are going to be self-taught. They're going to have the internet coming up. We need to get children to be able to read so that they actually understand what they're seeing, so they can think for themselves. And not everyone is going to go through that process of being academic. Because I knew I wasn't academic. But for some reason, I was just thinking, I think there's something we can do here. So my intervention was, why don't we go into schools? And then I started hearing people saying, you have to do a needs assessment. I didn't know what anyone was talking about. So I was like, okay, let's go into a school near me. Went to local government. I said, I want to do something with children. I want to go and support them in their school, and I want to read with them. And I was like, oh, have a children's party. Oh, so that was in a local government in Nigeria because I was out there. I actually ended up staying in Nigeria for 8 years. And I remember during that intervention of having the party and inviting the schools, I got myself into classrooms and just seeing what the situation was in public school classrooms. So schools that are free, children from the most disadvantaged homes having access to those schools, and they would basically come to the classes. A lot of the classrooms were highly populated, so you have children from 40 to 44 children in a classroom, to some classes were 16, some local governments. And then just hearing what they were saying, and I remember in the primary 4 class, a teacher said to me, I think we came in at 10, they've seen us quite a few times, and they're like, these children are trying to kill me. They don't know 2-letter words. And I was just like, what? How can primary 4 children not know 2 letters? Like, I was thinking, is it that they're afraid or they just don't know how to sound it? And I was thinking, you know what? Yeah, books, definitely books. We're doing literacy. We're going to name this project, we found a name, One Child, One Book. So basically every child gets a book of their own. And then we basically partnered with, how do we basically trying to raise money? Initially, I thought every book was going to cost, I think, 10p or something like that. It was those kind of ideas. But basically, I was a novice, and I think the thing that really helped me was just leaning into, which I really say now to anyone that's starting, just lean into not knowing, because there's so much that you will know eventually, but that joy, I will put it, of not knowing and just going out there and just doing it anyway. And I think there's also a sense of, yes, there's the element of you having research background, because honestly, if I could have the research and the statistics and the fundraising, all of that, that would be amazing. But just, I didn't know what I was doing, but in a sense, I was just like, just having the children open the books and I'm reading with them, and just that joy, to look at the pages. Some of them couldn't even read the words, but just there was something about it that just pulled me in. And I think that was what I will say really got me into it. I think that's what I would say as my journey to starting One Child, One Book.
Interesting. It's okay not to know. When I started, I didn't even have money. And the only money I had was my school fees. And I had to feed 30 children. I went to Red Cross Orphanage and the one in Makoko in Lagos. And I said to myself, well, I've got my school fees, but my mother is a widow. And I was like, okay, if I spend my school fees, how do I go to my mother to say to her, oh, I've used my school fees to feed children? So what I did was I had to use my school fees, and I had to go and learn how to make jewelries to pay back my school fees. So the first 2 years, I didn't have my own money. I was in uni, so I used my school fees. I had to sell jewelries to pay back my school fees. And funny thing, by my 3rd year, I told my mom, can you not give me any money anymore? Because I now make enough money from selling my jewelries. And, from starting with 30 children. 2nd year, I went to SOS Children's Village, 101 children. By the 3rd year, I started going to the streets because I found that even children in orphanages are actually more privileged than the ones in orphanages, because every time we went to the orphanage, others came in and brought things for the kids. And by the 3rd year, we had 300 children. And by the 4th year, I found this community with thousands of children. So it's okay not to know. And there's something I say that if it's your purpose, and the way I say it is, if it's God's will, it is his bill. He pays the bill. There are people that have donated to me that I don't know, whether they're white, whether they're black, tall, short. They just call and say, oh, I see this thing you're doing. Can I support? So it's okay not to know. And my next question really has to do with challenges. Now, you're from 2 different worlds. And Teodru is from an organized world where where there's funding available, but then there might be, I'm sure there's a lot of bureaucracy that comes with approvals and stuff like that. And for you, Tosin, you're almost like a one-man soldier. For those of you that still think I'm an expander, I'm also a one-man soldier. So you're a one-man soldier. So what are the challenges, and for you, Tosin, because you're more like an individual, you're a founder, everything is on you. You have to look for the funding, you have to look for volunteers, you have to make it happen somehow. So you have to get people to buy in. And Auntie Ojo, on the other hand, you probably have to get approvals for stuff. You have to sit in board meetings. And I think you might have to have requirements for whatever it is that you need to do. So what are the challenges? And I'm asking this question because some people want to work in places that are organized. UN, UNICEF, they want to do the great work. But the truth is, it might not be very easy to do it because you don't make the decisions. So what are the challenges? What is the toughest challenge that you've experienced? How have you managed it?
Well, it depends really on what, when you talk about challenges, there are challenges work-wise,
Yeah.
which is formal challenges, and then there are personal challenges, which is completely different.
So let's talk about
work-wise.
let's talk about funding.
Okay.
Okay, so you have this massive project. So now this is me building a story in my head because I don't know how it works there. You have this massive project. And by the way, I've worked on a UNESCO project before. So you have this massive project that you want to do. You want to go set up maybe like 30 libraries in South Africa. And you need funding.
So there are a couple of things in that space. So in the work that we do in the like an organization such as mine, which is a big humanitarian development organization, it's a bit different. There are two ways that you get funding. You get funding by responding to calls for proposals, which are usually big. So I oversee institutional and multilateral donors. So ODA, bilateral aid that comes from the UK government, UNICEF, World Bank. So that's different. We can, through our influence in department, shape the nature of the calls and highlight the needs through our advocacy department. So it's a whole kind of mix of things. However, if you identify something like what you said, that would be our colleagues from the my colleagues from the private who will assess private sector donors, because that's a bit more specific. I say that to say that some of the programs we do would be like to support the Nigerian government to address systems failures in the... So it's not that straightforward. It's something that the UK government has decided. This is where we want to intervene in Nigeria. And so this is where the calls for proposals will come from.
Yeah, so it's structured.
So structured. And that's a context for one of the challenges. One of those challenges is the fact that local solutions are often not part of designing the requests. So they're often imposed rather than built in partnership with communities. Yeah. That's one of these key challenges. But having said that, we all know what's... I'm sure most of you have heard about the recent executive order by the US government that has set a spiral by other governments, the UK government cutting aid as well for defense, and then the Netherlands government and Germany. So it's all coming. So the unpredictability of funding is a key issue. The needs are growing, the emergency response. And when people think about huge, big organizations, they often equate our work most times with the humanitarian emergency response. While there is a need for that, it's often the long-term development needs that are more crucial. So you respond to an earthquake. It's the rebuilding, it's the building the resilience for the communities and the countries so that that earthquake doesn't happen again. It's the empowerment that will be required so that people are able to generate income to feed their families, to feed their children. So for me, one of the challenges is people often think about aid as charity, as short term. But that is something that's really, it has its place and it's there and it's completely required. So, but going back to this, the biggest challenge the sector faces now is how the programs are going to continue. As a result of the stop work order, we've had to stop life-saving activities in over 40 countries, and I speak just about my organization. These will affect about, as a conservative estimate, 10.3 million people. As a result of the executive order, there are food in warehouses that cannot be distributed. There are women who depend on this food to feed their children in communities where they've been ravaged by the effect of climate change, and therefore there's no other alternative for them to. As a result of this, there's a particular, I was speaking at an event on Monday. There is, in our country office in Mozambique, the food is in the warehouse. She has 3 children. She depends on that food to feed her 3 children. It's like a joke for her. You know, she's like, the food is there. But because of the executive order, the staff are not able to go into the warehouse and open and do it. So contracts have been terminated with immediate effect. People have lost their jobs. So the ripple effect, particularly in communities. Also, there's a woman in Somalia. We've just had 90 million humanitarian program stopped in Somalia. And this woman gets 71 pounds every month to feed her 9 children and keep them in school. As a result of this stop work order, those 9 children are not going to get an education in the short term. What's the long-term effect? Do you know? And so when we often talk about, because of public perception of aid as charity, you know, it's over there. These are soft powers that governments utilize. Every day we open the TV, we read about migrants coming. The aid that supports economic development, that supports system building, that will prevent the migrants from coming. Stopping that aid will just accelerate that. So it's all, some of the challenges is the perception of aid and the understanding. So aside from that, the predictability of funding, and to be honest, the needs are growing and the funding is not there to support not just emergency response, but the long-term rebuilding that is absolutely essential for countries to be able to generate the income that is needed for children to be able to go to school and to thrive and to have their, you know, just reach their potential. So kids' dreams are being truncated as a result of decisions that are made far away. So if I leave you with anything, for me, my key challenges are local solutions. My key challenges are perception of aid. And then the other one is just the long-term thinking that's required to make sure that, you know, people, the shape and form of aid is acceptable to the public. And someone may say, does my £3 make a difference? It does. If my organization can count on it, it will enable us plan. It will give us the flexible funding that we can respond quickly. And so when you have effects like the stop work order, those flexible funds will enable us bridge the gap while we look for long-term funding. But I speak solely as a bigger INGO because I know that this is going to talk about smaller.
Like this is actually very sad, honestly, because it's painful, you know, to see that there are people who need stuff. I can't imagine me being hungry now and I want jollof rice and I can see it, but you're telling me I can't have it.
In
I'll
a
break
sense,
the door.
yes.
But I think that's the difference between a global, a big, charity and a small one. Because if the charity that I run, for example, and I'm sure Tosin, if I see a woman crying and they say there's no key to open the padlock, I will break the damn padlock because I can make that decision. But these people have to depend on people to make decisions before they take actions.
Yeah. And just to add one thing, I work for a smaller charity and I work for bigger charities. Oh, okay, I'm on air, I really can't talk. But I find it's like what you said, the freedom in the not knowing, and it gives you, it enables you be innovative and creative because you don't know the effect. So there's certain things I cannot do, as in most. And I'm not saying that people should do that. The bureaucracies that prevent you acting quickly. And you would see a child on the road and you probably would be able to give them food. I cannot do that.
Yeah. No.
I can't even give a child an arm, because there's all the safeguarding requirements and the potential. I'll just stop here.
Yeah.
Because I'm on air.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I went out to Nigeria, this was when I first started. I just put it as that. My thinking was I saw the big organizations and I thought, the great thing to do is to apply for grants. But I didn't know how to apply for grants. And then I think when I looked at the view of what I saw, the charity picture, I didn't like that picture. So it was tablecloths on the table, printed banner. I don't remember those pictures under a tree. I didn't like that. So for me, what I wanted to build was trying to build a brand, a product that people could back. And so that's actually how I funded it. So it was, I was really intentional about the products I was creating. What did this logo look like? What did our imagery look like? Did we have a website? Who were our potential partners? And what that we did was either individual donors. So the first school I went to found money, to my own money really, and put that together. The next people were companies. It was, I want to co-brand with you. I know. I think at some point we had a retainership with Jumia. I think that was for a year, where they supported us to go into schools every month. I think we did that for 9 months for a school year. And that was the kind of partnership that I wanted to have more of. And I think, to be honest, I think there's the element of, I remember applying for a USAID grant because at that point they were beginning to do a program on reading. But again, I was so out of my depth. But again, I will say, in this day and age, in how we're working, we have the internet. There's a lot more resources. There are a lot more people that we can connect with, people who can write grants, people who can raise funding. But I will definitely say, if you can, a lot of what comes out is really, for me, first of all, my charity, the idea that I was coming up with was how I envisioned it. I wanted to make sure that every imagery I had was high quality images. The branding, my inspiration was Apple, even though I do have Apple products. My inspiration was Apple. I wanted clean designs. I wanted, minimal colors. So when people saw things, they were just drawn to it. So I remember when we started, social media was a key to us. So Twitter, Instagram, we're all out there talking about things, trying to find how we could collaborate with people so we can talk about us. With all of that, I definitely, a lot of my passion was let's try and get the work done. So we're in schools, we're out there. So I will definitely say I think that's a model that definitely works. And I think unfortunately with the way things are now, with what's we've just, as you just told us about the cuts in government spending or basically having that funding coming, because it's really not coming through. There were a number of programs that I had to, which I will also say, I had to find out what's the government doing. I know that I'm not going to get that money, but can I get some kind of collaboration, some kind of, not visibility, but in a sense know that we're working together on the same page? So there's collaboration. So there was a UK ID program which was supporting training teachers on reading and instruction in the classroom. So it was a program that they launched across the world. But I remember in Lagos, they decided, because I was working primarily in Lagos to start off with, they had worked on those billions they had talked about. They've invested into this training, they'd provided them books. And to do what I had to do, I didn't just walk into schools. I had to go through the procedure of getting government approvals. Exactly, that took a while, and then being able to have my numbers as to how many schools are here, what are the addresses. So I had all that as well. So I was able to say, okay, because I know you're doing this, how about I meet with your teachers? I meet with the government office, because that's a different office again. So again, I will say be patient. You have to sit in South Africa, I'm sure, bureaucracy in any government. I don't know about UK government in that way. But there's always a lot of bureaucracy and sitting and waiting and basically filling one form to another form. But I remember having to sit with these people and just understand, is there a way that we could be contributing to this? And where I moved from, I'm going to a classroom, I will read with them when I go, they'll be so happy that we've come to the school, we'll share biscuits, everyone's happy. From that meeting there, I understood that one of the things that they were trying to achieve was to implement a reading period in every single school. So my books immediately became the books that every school that we worked with had materials for their reading period. Immediately I was meeting that. Even though they were not funding it, it could be Jumia, it could be Vitafoam, it could be whoever else, but I was now contributing to a global need. So there are things like that we can do. It's almost like connecting the dots in different ways. But I will definitely say there are different things that build up to that. I've tried to summarize as much as possible as to how I did that. But in a sense, it's just conversations, because really you don't know. But when you have that conversation, another conversation, I think I can do this. I think, jumping on webinars with USAID programs on reading as well was another thing where I connected people who were head of programs. They couldn't give me money, but they knew about my program. And I was like, why did you guys just give me money? But I knew that there was things that, you need to sign up to some country group or something. There are just different things in those elements. So there are ways. I definitely think that social media was key for me in terms of how do I tell the story and the imagery I wanted to tell. And then from then onwards, people were then talking about my product, my products, I'd say, the charity, because it was a product really, that was not me. And then people were coming to say, can we partner here, to now working with publishers. So books that was put into schools as well. So I think there's different things that connect. And as much as I think, to be honest, it was probably the 4th or 5th year that we were able to raise, I will say, 40% of what we set out in our year budget. I think it was that year that we raised that. And I was like, wow, we raised 40% of our predicted estimated budget for this year. That's amazing. We're really doing great, kind of thing. It took a while. It took a while to get there. But I definitely think that there's those things that do build up because, again, we're a small organization. Yeah.
You talked about not knowing about needs assessment. That is needs assessment. You identified a need and you were able to block it. And and people talk about, it's the need is so large. Where do I fit in? It's understanding where you can play a role. I also worked for a small NGO for 13 years, and we were able to scale programs with government, and it was the same thing. The persistence. That's the thing that gives me, now that I'm not on the field door to door, that knowledge is quite important in when we make decisions, for me to understand, no, you can do that, but we need time. Mm-hmm. So when the big governments say, within 1 year we can do that, I said, no, 3 years, because you have to realize that on the ground it's not, and it's not the same in every country.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if there's one thing you would leave with anyone, so whether they work in charity or whether they work their 9 to 5 within charity, or they own their charities, or they are looking to start one, what advice would you give them in terms of fundraising, how to start? Fundraising is a big one, honestly, because most people who own small charities find it difficult to raise funds. Most times they take money from their pockets to do stuff. And this leads to there's something called donor fatigue. It leads to that. It leads to, sometimes you have compassion fatigue as well, because by the time you're always dipping into your pocket. You know, you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm overwhelmed. I just can't do this anymore. And sometimes you recycle donors as well. You go to the same people all the time and they're like, guy, I also have dreams and aspirations. So it goes to someone else. So what word would you leave with people like that? That, okay, if you're working and you want to do a project, you know, and there's no funding available, what can you do? How can you improvise? If you own a charity and you want to raise funds or apply for grants, how do you go about it?
I think they usually say, go to your, friends, fools, and what was it they call? Family, friends, and fools. The first initial group of people that you go to. And yeah, it's true. A lot of times those are people that you will go back to get funded. But it's interesting that I think those people are the ones that amplify what you're doing. So to be honest, it's a kind of thing that you try. Every time you're going out to meet people, you're trying. I think when I was doing my first round of trying to raise money, I used to do letters. I would do 15-page letters with imagery of where I think I want to go and this is who we want to impact in this location. And then I was realizing that I don't think anyone's reading this. So I changed it to presentation slides, and it was 15 pages again. And I would try and make it colorful and all of that. And again, and then I sorted out to 4. So in a sense of, depending on who I was talking to, so if I was talking to someone so a church, for example, responded to my 15-page letter, they donated, a company, ignored my letter, responded to my presentation deck, the 15-page one, and then another one-man business. I noticed that the one-man businesses will respond to my 4-page ones. So I would get a meeting and then, so let's talk more about this. So it was that whole sense of when you're trying with different audiences. It's almost like how to say on social media. You talk differently on Instagram as you would talk on Twitter, as you would talk on LinkedIn. It's kind of like knowing your audience in that way. And then also another thing that I had to learn was when you're talking to your family, your friends, those initial ones, it might be, okay, want to support a child, £30, £10. But then when you're now talking to your friend who owns a business that sells food, for example, or would you sponsor 10 children? You know, would you consider supporting us for 6 months? You know, so basically it's that whole sense of adapting. And I think every single time you talk to people anyway, it's you're testing the waters and seeing, and then unfortunately, sometimes, you know, you get the no and it can be a bit disappointing because you really believe, you know, you really want that. You can see, you know, the faces of people who are expecting that impact, that handouts. You know the impact of what that money would do. You know how far it would go. You've already sacrificed, because to be honest, for us, we're talking about this. There's always a sacrifice that you do give of yourself, that it's just so important about that cause, that dream, that belief, that picture, that world you're trying to build. So it's a very heavy thing on you. So I definitely think it's a thing of trying. And I think one thing, as you just said, like when you're working in every element, in any environment, the interesting thing I've found is that any experience that you pick up, and to be honest, the more afraid you do things, it's so valuable. Like, in the next 20 years, in the next 50 years, it's something that you don't even realize that it's impacting you, but it's impacting every single person around you. That's one thing that I am, like the amount of times that I've gone out, I've done a pitch, a document. I'm now working in film, like you said, and I had to do something the other day for a studio, and when I did it, everyone was just, oh my God. But I was like, this is 8 years of me doing presentation decks for God knows who. This is me. Like, this is it, I'm just done it for you, and then someone's God knows how much money they're trying to get from that. But it's those experiences. So I would definitely encourage us, as much as there's those elements of you're not sure and try, but at the same time, and when they say no experience is lost, really and truly, like really, really and truly, no experience is lost. Again, elements of building a charity, I'm putting that in film now, similar experiences. So I would definitely just encourage that. Yeah, try, understand your audience, understand who you're talking to. There's also, this is community. There's something really valuable in community. In talking to people who are on your level, who are in the I don't know what I'm doing kind of situation, and they do, and you're really cheering each other on. So when you do your own I don't know what I'm doing, and they're cheering you on too, you understand what struggle you've come from. And then there's also a value in having community of people who are well above you. So they're looking down at you and they're like, okay, how did you feel? Okay, that's good. Okay, that one, maybe don't do that. Okay, why shouldn't I do that? And then they give you this overhead view of things. So there's something really amazing and so valuable about communities. So I would say if you could find it, if you could join any free ones, any online ones, any group ones, any people you could email, any people that you can follow, definitely, I would definitely encourage that.
And this is why, this is happening, community. And I keep saying there's no competition in charity. Yeah. It's not competition. We're all trying to make the world a better place. Yes. So it doesn't matter whether you're running fast or you're hiding things. There's no point because we're doing the same thing. We're running similar races. So, yeah, collaboration is key. So, Auntie Uju, do you have anything to add?
Well, mine is a little different from where I'm sitting, but I mean, but in terms of how I started, it's something that you said, Tosin, there's no, if you think Save the Children was founded slightly longer than 100 years ago by a lady called Eglantine Jebb. And one of the things that she says that resonates with me, because it's quite similar to what Mother Teresa said, is that we always consider things impossible until it's done. And said, and then we all know those quotes, and never underestimate what passion can do. So she was a single lady who just could not stand to see the effect of children after the World War. And so that's how Save the Children was born. And the organization I worked previously was the same. It was people sending food over. It always starts with a small idea. So I'm looking forward to what One Child, One Book will become. That's what it is. So charity is not about, charity is about dignity. It's about partnerships for long-term systemic change that is sustainable. People forget about that sustainability. Exactly. In my journey, we've done a lot of pilots. At a stage, I got really cross when I'd have to get money, and people were like, "Oh, pilots!" And in our ecosystem, we used to say, "We're tired of pilotitis." You come and pilot something. We want long-term sustainable change. That's why a lot of us who are from African descent in most of the sectors, we was like, we want long-term sustainable change. Bottom line, we don't want programs and projects. So that's why when I think about charity, it's about giving people dignity to make choices about their lives, and therefore. So for people who want to start, what I would say is, like Tosin, and you're my new inspiration now, start where you are. Yeah. Learn as much as you can. Never underestimate the power of your passion and your persistence. How can you make a difference? I took something when you were talking. Use your voice. Social media is absolutely fantastic for me and for us now. We're resorting to that to highlight the impact of aid, because we begin to realize that people don't understand really what aid is. So that's something that you can do. Some people write to you wrote letters. Yeah. We write social media. Social media is good now to help people amplify the voices. Then support organizations that align with your values. So one thing, when I got into the sector initially, I couldn't understand why, still don't understand why a lot of organizations don't collaborate more. The competition can be a bit fierce, but if you support organizations who align with your values, think collaboration. Yeah. And well, for us now, we have to think about that more with declining ODA. We do need to figure out how we can, because the needs are growing, the funds are dwindling, and the crisis, the issues are becoming more complex. And also volunteer time and skills for those who want to get into the sector. People always ask me, how did you get into your sector? Aside from the fact that it was divine positioning, it was something I really wanted for years. Yes, I invested my life savings to come and prepare myself by going to school and just wanting to make sure that, yes, it was. I had to it was a switch. But, volunteer time and skills. I spent 1 year working for the Health Protection Agency, not paid or got paid about. I spent a whole year just working because I wanted to build. Yeah, I worked in the Health Protection. I wanted to build. So sometimes you can't leapfrog that. As you said, there's a price to pay. Yes. Your time is there. And then sow a seed. Sow a seed. Your time is your seed. But then also, I work for Save the Children. I'm sure the supporter care don't even know this. But I do sow something every month towards where I work, and it was something that I found was really valuable for me in other organizations. And it always comes around. Sow a seed towards that thing that you want to. When I say sow a seed, it's make a small financial contribution to something that you believe in. Yeah. £2 a month, £3 a month, because at the end of the day, it's the ripple effect that will generate those changes that, And for those who feel, oh gosh, it's so daunting, how do I really start? Write to people, find a mentor, get someone to help you get in that space. I wrote to so many people who were in this space, and I would think, oh my God, they're really going to mentor me because, hey, I'm a Black female in this space, I'm African, everything. Well, people don't have the time, but it didn't stop me. I was intentional about, I need to move up here and I need to find my way here. So find whatever, find someone, find some people, find networks, join communities like this, and But don't underestimate your passion and your persistence and your voice.
Can I say something on the collaboration element? So I remember, sure. I remember actually the element of that. When you know what your area is, and you understand that you're not trying to solve everybody's problem, I think that it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, I'm collaborating. So I'm going to give an example where, because I know that we're not building schools, we're just giving books to children, we could then partner with other charities who were doing other things. So that made it a lot easier. So when I see somebody else who is doing something, in that way, I'm not in that lane. Let me stay in my own lane. Yeah, and then I can say I provide books for you, and then if there's something, I also help them magnify what they do as well, and people get to know about that. So I was going to say that's something that really helps with collaboration, and I will also say it helps with jealousy. When you see somebody else doing something that, oh my God, which I have felt several times, I think it just helps me understand, okay, hold on, are they on my lane? Is there a reason why I am feeling that jealousy of what they're doing? And maybe it's okay, maybe it's because I want to do a bit more. Then maybe I need to do more. But then just understand what my lane is, and let's work in that area. I think that really helps in terms of that area. Just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thanks, Tosi. And the power of storytelling now, honestly. Last week we were talking, and, about what I told you earlier about what's happening in the slum community where I work. And I put out some posts last week, and it came from my heart. I'd spoken to you, and you were like, Tolu, just do it. You're overthinking this thing. Just do it. And I put out the stuff. I've had more than 5 people reach out to me. I've had 5 people reach out to say, oh, I want to sponsor children. I've had a charity go in there to help 300 people in less than a week. Wow. Social media. Yes. So just put it out. Come out of your head. Yeah. Basically. Yes. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. If you've got any questions to ask any of these amazing women, please.
So I think what I will say, yes, it's true. We do need the government to put those policies in place that would make sure that if we're having 1,000 schools, for example, to meet a particular population, they understand population is growing. Do we need to increase the number of schools? Does that mean that we're increasing the number of teachers, books, funding, all of that? Let them build in that way. But for this year, they built a school and they've not provided enough books. So someone like me comes in, but I understand that there's that long-term picture. And honestly, from how I understand it, and from where I've seen some governments have conversations or roundtable discussions, all of those kind of policy meetings, that kind of information is fed in. But really, I think there's the element of charities, the smaller charities, I will say, or maybe the coalitions, who would then say, okay, we will come together as a group. Instead of it just being one person, there's 10 of us. And we know that there's an advocacy element that we need to keep being on that board, going to that meeting. So I've been fortunate to sit on education and also worked in modern slavery in the UK. So understanding how do you basically keep governments accountable to keep those promises that they've made, those budgets that they've declared for the next 10 years. But is those kind of things of organizing in a sense. But I will now say, as a small charity, there's that part of where I understand I need to make sure that I include that in my fundraising goal. It's not just I'm going to give you the books. Then I need to now make sure that I have money for petrol to go to those meetings. And I have to have extra paper on time to say that I'm going to that meeting and writing a letter. And so there's just that added element. But when it comes to how do you value it, how does the government value it? Would the government value my time to come to that roundtable meeting? So there's that part. Would the funder value, understand that there's a value in what I'm doing to build that for 10 years? There's another element of that. But then I would also say for government as well, there's that need for them to also understand there's the value of that. There's a need for that. So it's all either the bigger organizations come in and pressure them, or we on the grassroots pressure them. But whatever it is, there needs to be that kind of organization that we do going forward. That's how I say for my area.
So there are two ways. Personally, I think that a friend of mine wrote a blog, which I completely agree with, the way that we present aid as help by the Western donors. And she and her narrative is that, as far as she's concerned, aid is repatriation for colonial exploits. And I am radical enough to believe in that space. So hold that thought. But anyway, in response to your question, I think for most of us in the sector, it's not about the decision. Sovereign governments, sovereign nations, they make their own decisions. It was the disregard it was the timing. First, it was the 90-day. So the UK government has said, not that I'm in any way supportive of it, by 2027. So there's a leeway. There's time for African governments to plan how they take that aid that's coming through the UK government and put that into the system. So there is that time. So that's the issue with the executive order, the lack of assessment as to the impact is what it is, and the reverberation. I mean, the United States government alone funds about 30% of the humanitarian crisis around the world, but it's their money, and they can do, in a sense. They have a responsibility. That's it, in one sense. But on the other hand, there's so many other things we can talk about, but I don't want to because I'm on air. Let me not do that here. But the point is that it's the immediacy of the decision without the long-term ramification and not providing opportunity. Yes, it's an opportunity. For instance, the Nigerian government, I can tell you, pays a fraction of the GNI to health or education as compared to Ghana. We invest, I think it's about $15 per child in education, and Ghana is about $100 per child. And there's still, Ghana's investment is still not enough. I'm just giving you an example. So the African governments and most countries around the world have a responsibility to step up, have a responsibility to take. But for most, this is where the weakness is. The way that they have accepted the conditions that have come with the aid has not always been beneficial for the long term in the country. So there, of course, there's accountability without a doubt. That is absolutely something that needs to be done. Given how long we have had aid coming into the country, what has been the long term impact? But there are two sides to that coin. The donor government, the conditions in which the governments have received it have not always been to the long-term benefits of the countries. I cannot. But without a doubt, there's an opportunity to step up. And also these programs, as I said to you, as I mentioned earlier, for somebody who is from the global south, having worked with it, we don't want this short-term local solutions need local decisions. It needs that for long-term sustainability. We haven't always had that. It's often been imposed, but that's changing. I mean, we've talked over the last 20 years about grant bagging. Grant bagging is making decisions and money available to the places where the need is. That has been a rhetoric for so long. The advantage of these decisions is that it will make that a reality in the long term. The upside is that people will lose their jobs and there will probably not be, how do you say, technical expertise that is northern driven, But yeah, there is a role for government and they have for so long shirked that role, and it's time for them to step up. That's a really great question, and it's interesting that you talked about the needs growing here, because we haven't traditionally had a strong. Well, we've always had programs in the UK, but in the last year we've ramped up. In the last 5 years, we've ramped up our programming in the UK because child poverty is at, I think, almost world levels. It's really difficult to believe. We're running baby bank alliances where people go to get nappies and food for children. It's a real issue. But your question is specifically on the diaspora. That's something that I'm actually interested in, and it's something that we're trying to also so for work, when we harness the diaspora here, is to send money back home. Yeah. But in another initiative, my interest has been growing, and there's someone here who is in that same space. I haven't had enough headspace to examine it properly, but it's something that hits on a personal level, not on a work level. And it'd be great to try and talk some more about that. I can't offer an informed opinion. All I have at the moment are just anecdotal data that I'm collating for another group that I belong to in a church setting, because it is growing.
I'm working on something around that as well, and I think I've mentioned it to you, and it's still in the works. So when I came to this country, I cried because I told God, you took me from where I was doing great work, what I considered great work and purpose, and you brought me to this structured, organized environment where I don't see children that are visibly hungry, So what's this about? Can purpose change? And I dream a lot. And I had this dream, and I saw a child who looked normal, didn't look like my children in the slum, but it was sad. And I was like, what's wrong with you? He said, oh, I'm not happy because my parents took me to a school of ostrich and, said something about ostrich parenting. So I went to Google when I woke up and I searched for that, ostrich parenting. What does it mean? And I never found an answer. But I've never seen anything like that. There's nothing called ostrich parenting, but my dream told me something about ostrich parenting. But I now started thinking of the ostrich, doing a bit of study around the ostrich. And what does the ostrich do? It looks like it buries its head in the sand. Yeah? And one thing that I found, and that's what I'm building on for this sort of things, is that most of us live that way. We bury our heads in the sand. We see the traits, we see everything, and we are like, oh, God forbid, I reject it in Jesus' name. We say things like that, and then we look away from the obvious. And then our children get groomed, all those things happen. And by the time we wake up to reality, it's almost too late. So there's a level of awareness, there's a level of intentionality that we need to do. And this goes beyond just the children. Sometimes the parent needs help. The parents really need help. They need to be informed about certain things. We have a different culture. So there's the whole culture shock. There's a whole lot of things at play. So honestly, it's a big one. We need the government. We need the church. And even as parents, we need to be equipped. We need information. We need knowledge. We need intention. We can't just be chasing the pounds. You know, there's a level of work that we need to do.
I was going to just say something with that one. So the point you said about children in care, there are some charities that do work to prevent more Black families having children in care. I don't think there are that many, but maybe there's a gap there to fill. But then, as we were saying this, I was just thinking about how I've always thought that when we have a problem, we always seem to think sometimes the problem only happens home. This problem only happens in Nigeria, but it also happens here. So exactly what Tolu just said, like every single thing of what you are experiencing. If a child was hanging around with a wrong crowd when we were growing up in Nigeria, they'll cut us off. They'll put us in lesson. You know, they'll put us in piano school activities. And honestly, I actually was thinking about that because one of the things that we saw when knife crime went up was there was a cut to social spending, like all the groups that we had, that activities where children were able to go to, that has been cut. So, there's only so much that as an individual you can do, but there's also the pressure, exactly what you said. Parents, I'm not a parent, but I do understand and I do see parents are facing a lot of pressure to basically earn that money, grow their income, take care of the family. There's a lot of mental health as well that I think needs to be addressed. I think mental health also makes you have to confront, as a parent, your own issues, to then also be present for the child, also conscious of what are you chasing in a sense. So again, maybe there's a gap there. So there's some things that I think, how I see things really is not, maybe you're not solving the whole problem of, I'm going to cure the problem of night crime in this estate. Maybe what are those things that could connect? Who are the other people working? You know, if you're going to be working on, I don't know what area you want to look at, is it going to be groups? You know, so there are different ways that you can look at that, but people do exist in those spaces. It might be a thing of having conversations. On the point of knife crime element and grooming, people who work in county lines, that could be an interesting subject for you to look at because they talks a lot about grooming and police are doing a lot of work in terms of how do you stop the grooming. So that could be another piece there.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So guys, thank you all for listening.